I never thought a $250 notice could feel like someone stealing my home. The HOA called it a lien, my uncle called it fraud, and he froze their bank account in 48 hours. They smiled at the mic, but the ledger told a different story. And that wasn't even the worst part. The envelope was thin, almost weightless, yet it dragged at my hand as though it carried bricks. A neat return address in the block font told me what I didn't want to know: Brushy Creek Homeowners Association. I shut the mailbox, cicadas shrilling above me in the maple tree, and felt the air shift heavy around my chest. I carried it inside, fingers smudging the edge as I tore it open. The paper rasped like sand. My eyes found the words before I was ready. Notice of intent to lien $250. It might as well have said, "We own you." A lien wasn't just $250. It was a stain on my credit, a shadow that could touch our retirement account, the mortgage Elaine and I had nursed for decades. I set the paper down flat on the kitchen table and rubbed at the indent the mailbox key had left in my palm. Elaine came in behind me carrying the smell of the neighbor's barbecue. Smoke clung to her sweater, sweet mesquite, drifting through the open screen door. She didn't ask what was wrong. She saw the letter. She set 2 mugs of tea between us, one hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "Don't get pulled into their heat," she said quietly. "Write it down. Don't feed the fire." Her calm was the ballast to my shaking. I could already hear Brittany Hale's voice, though she wasn't in the room. I had only met her twice, once at a neighborhood welcome gathering and once at an HOA meeting where she spoke of property values like they were commandments. Her name was on the letterhead elegant script under the printed threat. I pushed the paper aside and pulled open the drawer of the roll-top desk. The ledger waited there. Old leather, dark brown edges, burnished by time. A gift from Uncle Raymond when I first bought the house, though I had never used it for more than jotting dues and the occasional note about repairs. The smell of dust and ink rose as I opened it, comforting in its ordinariness. I smoothed the first blank page with my palm and copied the notice line by line, my pen scratching slowly. Lien, $250. Notice of intent. My hand trembled enough that the letters leaned, but I kept writing. It felt like staking a claim to my own ground. If they wanted to fight on paper, then paper would be my shield. The cicadas outside clicked like an endless clock. I thought of my parents who lost a home once to a bank error they couldn't untangle. I had sworn never to let bureaucracy blindside me again. My eyes kept returning to the letter, to the way the words Lien and Homeowners Association sat together on the page like oil and water, refusing to mix. Elaine slid her mug closer, steam curling. "We'll figure it out," she said. No dramatics, just a statement like she was balancing the checkbook. I leaned back, the ledger open before me, the letter flattened beneath my pen. I didn't storm over to Brittany's porch or pound on doors. I didn't fire off angry emails. I wrote slow and deliberate, each stroke a reminder that quiet record-keeping can be louder than shouting. The house felt still, but my laptop chimed from the other room. A new email. I stood the screen glow, catching my face. The subject line was short, sharp, and cold: non-compliant property, Vaughn residence. The community center smelled of floor cleaner and burnt coffee. January cold pushed against the glass doors as neighbors stamped salt off their shoes. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I took a seat near the aisle folder on my knee, a photo of my yard tucked inside. Elaine set her spiral notebook in her lap, dated the page underlined twice. Her pen tapped. She knew I hated these rooms, rows of chairs, a dais, a gavel, a crowd pretending to be a community. Brittany Hale called the meeting to order, voice sharp, gavel knocking once. Tom Whitaker sat stiffly beside her paper-squared plaid tie like a uniform. The agenda rolled Minot's treasurer's report contracts. Each item passed in the chant of motion, second approved. I matched my breathing to the rhythm. Then, public comments, 2 minutes per homeowner. I stood. Chair legs screeched. "Merrick Vaughn," I said into the microphone. My voice echoed. On the lien notice. I held up the photo, winter grass-trimmed, edging sharp mailbox, upright neighbors, flowers, proof of scale. "I've paid dues." The citation lists neglect and noise, but no evidence. The notice threatens a lien for $250. I ask that the board show the violation, cite the section. The mic clicked dead mid-word. Brittany raised her hand like a stop sign. "Your 2 minutes are up." She didn't look at the timer, just waved smoothly, already turning to the next name. The room hollowed. My last word vanished into the hum. I lowered the photo, pointless now. "Thank you for your participation," she said. I sat. Elaine squeezed my hand under the table. On her notes I read, "Ask for section." "Due process." She'd underlined the question mark. Neighbors, looked away eyes on shoes, phones anywhere but me. People who waved across driveways pretended not to know me. The agenda swept on. Pool signage, lawn contracts, trash reminders. I pressed my lips together, letting silence harden. As the meeting ended, a man leaned close, peppermint on his breath. "Check their minutes sometime," he muttered. "You'll see what disappears." Then he zipped his coat and left. Elaine caught my look. "What did he say?" "Minutes," I whispered. "Check their minutes." In the hallway, bulletin boards carried flyers for tennis lessons, lost pets. Behind glass binders labeled by month. On a corkboard, the newest minutes pinned with brass tacks. I leaned close. Date, location, attendance. Normal. Then the line that mattered, public comments, none. None. Elaine snapped a photo. I pulled my pen, copied the line into my notebook. My hand pressed too hard, tearing the paper. "Write it down, not through it," she said gently. I exhaled. The hallway emptied. Staff wheeled chairs past rubber wheels thumping each threshold. We walked out into the brittle night street lamps casting yellow circles. Every house looked brochure perfect. My pocket held the useless photo proof ignored. At home, the kitchen light was warm. I laid the notebook beside the ledger, set the lawn photo between. Elaine brought tea, steam rising. "That neighbor knows something," she said. "Or enough to hint," I replied. She stapled the photo to my notes. "Paper hides. Marry it to something stronger." I smiled faintly. Librarian proverb, the oldest. I opened the ledger to the page with the lien notice. Beneath it, I wrote, "Minutes posted, public comments none." The ink bled where my hand shook. Elaine tapped her pen on her note. Due process. They don't like to say section numbers. Numbers can be checked. I thought of Brittany's wave, the mic going silent. Words erased in air. Numbers lingered. I gathered newsletters and bylaw excerpts I'd printed. Lifting one, I saw it a streak across a line, white and rough. Correction fluid. I held it to the lamp. Ghost letters showed faintly beneath. Someone had erased poorly. Elaine bent close. "That isn't your copy." "No," I said. "It isn't." The refrigerator hummed, filling silence. I laid the sheet beside the ledger. The smear stood out like snow in summer. I didn't write this time. I let the page sit evidence in plain sight. Quiet doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means something's been buried. Ben Navarro's backyard smelled like mesquite and pepper. It was the kind of Texas evening that made sweat bead along your hairline and turned bottle labels slick. String lights sagged between two ash trees and a folding table bowed under a platoon of sauce bottles. Someone laughed near the grill metal tongs, clicking an easy rhythm that said nothing about liens or minutes or correction fluid. For the first time in months, I let the noise of other people rise higher than the noise inside my head. Uncle Raymond arrived late as he did in retirement, unhurried and tucked shirt-tail in belt-polished glasses sliding down his nose until a shrug put them back. He hugged Elaine first, then handed me a bottle like a truce. When I reached for it, he pressed something else into my palm, a worn business card, edges softened like river stones. Senior Internal Auditor. It read the name and bank embossed in a sober font. He lifted his chin. "Sometimes you need a different tool." I tucked the card into my wallet behind the picture of our daughter on her first bike. They turned off the mic, I told him, then posted minutes that said, "Public comments none." He listened without interrupting, which was his best skill. When I ran out of anger, he nodded once as if confirming a diagnosis we both already knew. "File a records request," he said. "Start there." "Public records?" I asked. "It's a private association. Financial records are not a family Bible," he said. "Your bylaws and state statutes will say what must be produced and when. Fees assessed, notices issued, minutes approved, those live somewhere in ink. If they don't, that's a different kind of problem." Ben waved from the grill with a greasy spatula. "You two want brisket ends or civilized slices?" "Ends," Uncle said, as if decisions were best practiced on meat. He tapped the bottle against mine. Clink soft in the dusk. The sound threaded through the yard like a bell. We found a spot at the picnic table. Elaine slid over a napkin, already open, pen uncapped. "Okay," she said to Uncle. "Teach us how to be boring in a way that wins." He smiled. "Boring is undefeated." I pulled the ledger from my bag. The leather looked darker out here, almost blue where the string lights pooled. The coffee stain from the inspection rippled along the margin like a watermark. Uncle ran a finger over it, not touching the paper the same way a doctor hovers over a bruise. "Start with a clean list," he said. "Not every fact. Only the facts that move the wheel. Dates of notices, dollar amounts, sections cited. Elaine wrote on the napkin. Dates, amounts, sections. She underlined sections and added a box. Where do I send the request I asked? Follow the bylaws, Uncle said. They dictate custodianship. Sometimes it's the secretary, sometimes a management company. Ask for fee schedules, board approvals for legal expenditures, vendor contracts, signed minutes, not emailed summaries, signed minutes. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. Signatures matter. They pin a moment to a person. A gust of warm air lifted the paper plates. The neighbor kid cut through the yard chasing a dog with a bandana tied like a kerchief. For a minute the world narrowed to ordinary mess, and then Uncle tugged me back. Money trails must balance, he said. If they say a lien is for $250 and your account shows dues paid, ask how they justify the escalation. Attorney fees require authorization. Authorization requires a vote. A vote requires minutes. You see, pull one thread. Elaine held her pen still. What about that correction fluid on the newsletter? Burying mistakes is more expensive than owning them, he said. We don't accuse. We ask for the record as it is required to exist. I flipped to the page where I'd copied the lien. The ink had bled where my hand shook. Uncle's eyes softened. This isn't memory, he said, turning a few pages, the paper whispering. This is evidence. The words landed heavier than the brisket. Something eased behind my ribs. For months, I'd been trying not to be angry. He was offering a different discipline, not anger, not silence, but ink with a spine. File the request politely, he said. Give them their own rules to stand on. People fall off their own ladders. A clink of glass at the cooler marked the moment another soft bell in the dark. I felt the chapter turn small but real. Ben dropped 2 paper boats in front of us. Sauce bled into the cardboard heavy with smoke and spice. He looked at the ledger like it might bite and said, If you need signatures for anything, you know the block's got pen arms. Careful, Uncle said. He'll draft you into the infantry. I'm a grill man, Ben said. I don't march, I baste. Laughter loosened my shoulders. I ate, and my body remembered that food is a kind of proof, too. When the plates were just streaks of sauce, Uncle leaned in. Tomorrow, you request copies of the bylaws and amendments, the fee, schedule, and all minutes for the last 2 years. Ask for board approvals authorizing legal expenditures related to your address. I started to write. He touched my wrist. And ask for the section they believe you violated. Don't accept noise as a noun. Force it to be a number. Elaine scribbled on the napkin, then folded it into my pocket like a prescription. We'll make copies at home, she said. I've got clear sleeves. Bring a flashlight, Uncle said lightly. Records rooms are allergic to lighting budgets. For a moment he seemed to drift eyes on the string light's mind elsewhere. The glasses slid. He let them. Then he reached for the bylaws packet I had printed, the pages clipped with a bulldog clip. The corners were already dog-eared from my untrained study. These not the newsletter, he said. Newsletters are for mood. Bylaws are for battles. He flipped through pages, whispering. The night air shifted with the sound of paper breeze. He stopped and flattened a page with the heel of his hand. His finger traced a paragraph, then dropped to a subheading I had skimmed too fast to notice. He circled a number with Ben's grill pencil, the lead leaving a smudged halo. Section 4.2, he said, voice almost mild. They rarely follow it. The pencil mark looked crude against the formal font like graffiti on a courthouse wall. I leaned in and read the line he'd pinned. It was simple, almost boring, the kind of requirement you skip when you assume meetings will take care of themselves. Notice quorum signatures timing. Numbers don't shout, he had said. They just end arguments. Under the string lights, his face looked both older and more certain, a map of places where patience had been the only weapon that worked. Tomorrow, Uncle said, tapping the circled number you ask for every piece of paper this section says must exist. Not because you're angry, because it's required. The dog with the bandana barked at a moth. The string lights hummed. Somewhere beyond the fence, a train gave a lonely horn and then swallowed it. I tucked the bylaws back into the clip and felt the ledger grow heavier in my bag, not with dread, but with purpose. Numbers don't shout, he said again, almost to himself. They wait. I nodded, tasting smoke and resolve. The napkin in my pocket rustled when I inhaled a flimsy square with marching orders on it. We stood, and the table creaked as if to agree. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow, he echoed and tapped the penciled circle once as if setting a seal. The newsletter lay on our kitchen table like a summons glossy paper catching the early sun. My yard stared back in full color under a headline that tried to sound clinical noise and neglect a case study. Brittany's smile floated in a small, inset headshot, the kind of smile that belongs on a brochure. The coffee in my cup had gone cold while I traced the photo's edges with my eyes as if I could lift my lawn out of their story and set it back into mine. Elaine stood by the window with the curtain pulled to the side. "If they print this bold," she whispered, "imagine what's hidden in their ledgers." She let the curtain fall. Outside, a neighbor I used to wave to quickened her pace when she saw us lifting her phone to her ear as a shield. The turned shoulder felt louder than the headline. The doorbell rang. Tom Whitaker waited on the porch with a clipboard and a travel mug. His plaid tie had a coffee drip like a punctuation mark. "Courtesy inspection," he said, already stepping past the threshold. "We've had reports." I opened the ledger on the desk because the habit had become a reflex. Write it down. Keep it straight. Tom drifted through rooms, clicking his pen and lifting blinds as if sunlight could reveal moral failings. "Grass height," he murmured. "Mailbox alignment." Decorative sounds. He set his mug down on the ledger like it was an extra coaster. A ring bled into the leather first, then feathered into the paper beneath. I watched the stain widen a slow eclipse crossing careful lines. My chest burned not with volume but with heat that wanted somewhere to go. Tom flipped a page with his pen tip, and the mug skidded, printing a second moon. "You're marking my records," I said. "Just resting my coffee," he answered. I closed the book around the mug and lifted both the leather cool, the metal warm. "Rested somewhere else." My voice came out level. He blinked, then took the mug back with a shrug and a wet ring on his hand. He wiped it on his tie, deepening the punctuation. Elaine hovered at the doorway, eyes on the book. I opened it again. The stain had darkened to the color of old syrup spreading into the margin where the Lien line lived. Evidence marked by something as careless as a cup. Tom turned on his heel, ticking boxes when he saw nothing to ticket. "We're all stewards of standards," he said, as if reciting from a manual. "Property values rely on uniformity." "Uniformity isn't honesty," Elaine said. He smiled as if she'd paid him a compliment. "We'll be in touch." His shoes squeaked a farewell down the hall. When the door latched, the quiet folded itself around us like packing foam. I ran a tissue gently over the ledger's page and watched the ink halo where the coffee had kissed it. The stain didn't cover any words, but it announced itself the way a bruise does, present undeniable. We stood at the window again. The woman who had quickened her pace earlier came back up the block with her dog eyes fixed on a horizon only she could see. Her leash hand loosened as she passed our mailbox. The dog veered toward our lawn and was reeled back with a snap of nylon. She didn't look up. The mail truck's brakes breathed at the curb an hour later. The carrier knocked once, then left a flat white envelope with the green return receipt tab folded like a small wing. I carried it to the table and sat as if the chair were deep water. "Want me to open it?" Elaine asked. "No," I said. "I need to feel the paper." The seal pulled with a sound like skin leaving tape. Inside the letterhead was familiar, same font, same tidy lines. "Notice of intent to Lien, final warning." The phrase tried to be procedural, but it curled like a threat. The date set a window that felt like a vice. Elaine put her hand on the back of my neck. "Write it down," she said. "Don't feed the fire." I copied the words into the ledger beside the old entry, the coffee ring lapping at the edge of the sentence. The pen behaved like it knew the route. Final warning. I underlined it once, not for drama, but for focus. The room smelled like cold coffee and ink sun pushing through the blinds in thin ladders. I thought about the headline calling my lawn a case study, as if home could be a specimen under glass. You can put anything under glass long enough and people forget to ask who framed the slide. My chest cooled slowly. The ledger looked older now, which felt both wrong and fair. A tool only becomes real when it carries scars. I closed it with care and rested my palm on the cover. Outside, a cicada buzzed. Inside, the refrigerator hummed two machines pretending everything was normal that day. The doorbell rang again, and another knock settled through the wood like a small verdict. I stood my chair legs sighing across tile. The envelope flap cracked under my thumb when I opened the door, and a second certified notice slid across the table, its edges bright as a blade. The envelope was thick this time, a bulge of paper that made the mailbox hinge groan when I pulled it free. I stood on the curb with the late sun in my eyes and slid it open with my thumb. Pages slid out like a deck of bad cards. Someone had circled numbers and red ink arrows underlines totals that didn't match anything in my memory. The original $250 had grown antlers. Attorney fees, late penalties, administrative costs. My name appeared in block capitals above a paragraph that used words like foreclosure and remedies available. The red circle around the final amount looked like a wound. By the time I reached the porch, the paper shook in my hand. Elaine opened the door at my face rather than my knock. She took one look at the numbers and pulled me to the kitchen table where the ledger waited coffee-stained moon scars still dark in the leather. "We fight this," she said, but her voice carried the calculation of a person looking at the jagged mouth of a cliff. "If we lawyer up our 401k, I know," I said. She pressed her lips together the way she did when a library patron returned a book with the spine cracked. Numbers that big shouldn't be allowed to use the word administrative. I called Uncle Raymond before I could talk myself into anything stupider than hope. He picked up on the first ring breath steady like he'd been waiting. "Read it to me," he said. I did. I read the red circles too like they were part of the sentences. When I finished, I let the paper fall flat and listened to the refrigerator hum. In the silence between us, my heart sounded mechanical. The more noise they make, Uncle said, the more footprints they leave. File an audit demand. Today. Ask for board approvals authorizing legal expenditures, signed minutes, fee schedules, and ledgers showing how they applied payments to your account. And then I asked. Then you seek an injunction to stop any enforcement until the audit is completed, he said. Don't rage, make them prove. I shut my eyes. They're threatening our home for $250, I said, and heard my voice crack on the last word. I wasn't angry, I was tired in a place bones can't reach. I know what it feels like, he said, but feelings don't file. Paper files. I'll email you a template. A gust of AC breathed dust from the vent. Sunlight drew blinds into ladder rungs across the table, cutting the red circles into measured pieces. Elaine slid a paper cup of coffee toward me, the office kind stale and bitter, even brand new. I took a sip anyway. It tasted like the waiting room of a long day. We drove to a small law office off Spring Creek Parkway because their website said they handled homeowner disputes and because parking was free. The lobby smelled like carpet shampoo and older magazines. The receptionist offered us bottled water with a crackly label that peeled at the edge. A vent rattled above the fern in the corner. The young attorney's door was open. He stood when we entered, shook both our hands like he was practicing being a person people trusted, and gestured us to two chairs that pinched my shoulders. So, he said, smoothing his tie. HOA, Lien. I laid the packet on his desk. He paged through whistling once under his breath at the red circles. They do love their fees. My dues are current, I said. I've maintained my property. I can show you photos. But their letter says that they can, that they will, that they must, he said gently. HOA letters read like a catechism of inevitability. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're loud. He listened as I explained the minutes that recorded none where my voice had been the newsletter with correction fluid, the inspection with the coffee ring, the final warning. He took notes in a slow, looping hand, the kind of penmanship they stopped teaching because computers are cheaper. Elaine crossed her ankles at the base of the chair and said quietly, If we fight, will it eat our retirement? We're not wealthy. We're steady. He looked at her, then at me. I don't know yet, but if you do nothing, you already know the cost. He touched the packet with a fingertip. Injunctions stop clocks. Audits turn noise into records. I pulled the ledger from my bag. He raised his eyebrows at the leather at the ring stain that half-mooned the page where Lien lived. Evidence, I said, and he smiled like we were speaking the same language. His printer woke like an old dog when he sent the audit demand template to it. Pages crawled out warm, smelling faintly of toner. The AC kicked up another dusty sigh and stirred the blinds so they ticked like a metronome against the window frame. Send this to the records custodian named in the bylaws, he said, handing the papers across. Certified mail. Keep your receipts. If they ignore or delay, that is also a record. We'll request a temporary restraining order to halt enforcement pending production. He clicked his pen, closed a small punctuation. I'll file the petition for injunction as soon as we have the green cards back. How much retainer? Elaine asked. He named a number that made my throat go dry, but not as dry as the word foreclosure. We said yes, like people who had weighed a parachute against a long fall and chosen string and silk. Back home, I spread the audit demand across the table like a map. The dusty blinds cut it into squares of light. I signed my name and felt the pen steady at last as if my wrist had found a rail. Elaine prepared the certified envelopes, the green cards clipped to the front like small flags. Before we sealed them, I opened the ledger. The coffee halo on the margin had faded from dark bruise to the color of tea, but it was still there. I added a line neatly beneath the last lien disputed. Audit demanded. Date/time. I wrote the numbers slow enough to mean them. Template in your inbox. Uncle texted, followed by, Don't argue in email. Ask for documents by name. "Thank you," I typed back and stared at the screen until the glow softened. At the post office, the clerk stamped the receipts with a satisfying clunk and slid them back under the plexiglass. "Green cards come back in a few days," she said, like we were talking about postcards from a better place. I tucked them into the ledger, the leather swallowing them like it had been waiting for this duty. Back home again, how many trips can a day contain? We sat in the kitchen without speaking for a minute that felt deserved. I let the AC hum wrap the room and tried to hear my pulse return to something human. Elaine set her hand over my thumb, rubbing the ridge of a knuckle that always aches when storms are coming. My phone vibrated against the wood. A new email subject line shouting even without an exclamation point, "Emergency board meeting, special assessments to be discussed." The red circles on the letter looked almost modest beside those words. I tapped the screen, and the message opened like a curtain on a stage I didn't want to stand on. The date was 2 days from now. Attendance strongly encouraged. Elaine read over my shoulder. "Teeth," she said. The Lien grew teeth. I closed the phone and, almost without meaning to, rested my hand on the ledger. The stain under my palm had dried long ago, but the page remembered. So would I. The municipal chamber smelled faintly of carpet shampoo and copier toner. The city seal glinted above the dais, and the microphone hissed even when no one spoke. I sat at the side table with the ledger on my lap, palm pressed to the old coffee stain. Elaine's knee tapped mine our code for breathe. Brittany Hale stepped forward, first folder tucked tight under her arm. Tom Whitaker trailed her tie-squared eyes on his stack of printouts. "This homeowner has refused to pay fees," Brittany declared. "We've documented neglect noise and unpaid assessments." She slid a photo of my lawn across the table. The microphone hiss stretched her voice until it sounded less certain. Uncle Raymond leaned toward me. "Numbers are louder than speeches," he murmured. Then he slid the ledger onto the table and opened it to a page lined with dates, fees, and notations. The coffee ring shadowed the margin like an old bruise. When the clerk called on me, I kept my voice even. "My dues are current." I asked for records. What I received included unsigned minutes and stacked fees without authorization. Uncle lifted one photocopy and laid it beside the ledger. "2 versions of the same month's minutes," he said. "One signed, one not. No vote authorizing attorney fees. Section 4.2 requires notice quorum signatures. They don't appear." Tom cleared his throat. Counsel advised. "Where's the vote?" Uncle asked, still mild. "Show us the signatures." The clerk adjusted her glasses and read directly from the bylaws. Section 4.2, notice quorum signatures. Absent these, the action is not valid. She looked at Brittany. "Do you have the minutes?" Brittany flipped pages, sleeve brushing the mic and sending a squeal through the room. Her folder bent under her grip. Tom shifted papers but found nothing solid. The clerk turned back. "Under Section 4.2, this lien is invalid." Murmurs swept the chamber. A neighbor whispered, "I knew it." Someone else shushed. Elaine's hand tightened on my shoulder. Uncle waited for the noise to settle. To safeguard funds while the audit proceeds, he said we request a freeze on the HOA's operating account. Brittany's smile cracked. "That is unnecessary punitive." "Transparency isn't punishment," Uncle replied. The city attorney finally spoke. "A temporary freeze limited to ordinary expenses is appropriate pending audit." The clerk nodded and her voice carried into the microphone. "Effective immediately, the Brushy Creek HOA operating account is frozen limited to ordinary expenses until required records are produced. The lien against Mr. Vaughn is suspended." The chamber exhaled. Chairs creaked, pens scratched. The reporter's hand flew across his pad. Elaine leaned close enough for me to hear her whisper, "It held." I hadn't realized I'd risen half out of my seat. I lowered myself and touched the ledger. The stain no longer looked like damage. It looked like history. Across the room, Brittany's folder edges curled where her grip had sweated through the cardboard. Tom kept his eyes on the table jaw tight. Neighbors watched with an intensity usually reserved for fireworks. Uncle closed the ledger softly and slid it back to me. "Keep your receipts," he whispered, a phrase that felt more like benediction than advice. We left the chamber through a corridor that smelled of stale coffee. Phones buzzed as neighbors texted each other. A woman I barely knew murmured "good" as we passed. Outside, the asphalt shimmered with late heat. Elaine shaded her eyes and smiled faintly. "Numbers won today." My phone buzzed before I could answer. An email subject line shouted from the screen, "Emergency board meeting, special assessments to be discussed." Elaine read it too. The glow lit her face as the parking lot went quiet around us. The ledger weighed steady in my hand, the stain warm under my palm. By sunrise, the listserv was a kettle on boil. Why are our accounts frozen? Who approved attorney fees? Does this mean our pool closes? The ding of new mail beat faster than the coffee maker. I printed sample threads and taped them to the garage wall until the pegboard looked like a quilt of contradictions. The garage smelled of toner grass clippings and the faint sweetness of fertilizer. The ledger sat open on the workbench beside a stapler and a jar of pens. Highlighter stripes cut across HOA promises that contradicted themselves. Brittany's cheery no special assessments this year against her later extraordinary needs. Tom's stiff mention of approved counsel beside minutes showing no such vote. Uncle Raymond arrived first, a paper sack of clipboards under his arm. Signatures, not slogans, he said, setting them down. Noise can be ignored. Names less so. Elaine poured him coffee, her smile more real than I'd seen in months. Ben came next with a tray wrapped in foil. "Brisket ends," he announced. The smell carried through the garage door. Barbecue diplomacy beats board politics. He licked sauce off a knuckle and signed the first sheet. Elaine laughed, handing cups to neighbors as they drifted in, drawn by both smoke and curiosity. Lien crossed the lawn in soft shoes tote bag, bumping her side. "Is this democracy's annex?" she asked. "I brought my own pen. It writes on receipts." She scrawled her name with a flourish. The printer coughed more pages. I taped a column marked promises and another actions. Side by side, the gaps spoke louder than I could. The garage fan clicked with each slow turn, keeping time. Neighbors studied the wall, murmured, then bent to clipboards. Dates, addresses, signatures stacked. The sound of pens rasping over paper built into a rhythm steadier than any speech. Lane set pickles on the bench for those needing sharpness with their resolve. "Any speeches?" Ben asked. "No speeches," Uncle said. "Only answers." What this petition does, what it doesn't. 2 clean asks, vote of no confidence, transparency amendment. Simplicity wins. "Low and slow," Ben said, nodding at his tray. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves until they were handed brisket scraps. Sauce-dotted shirts. The tension eased into conversation. One older couple signed after Lien pointed at the contradictions column. When the music doesn't match the score, she told them, you rewrite the notation. I gathered finished sheets, stacking them square. Each addition made the ledger beside me feel heavier with purpose. A man from down the block arrived sheepish. I said things online, he admitted, eyes low. Better to see papers. He read, then signed, then reached for brisket. By mid-afternoon, the stack rose to 40 households. Uncle placed the stapler in my hand. "Count," he said. I did 38, 39, 40. I squared the corners, pressed the handle, and the staple shut with a sharp click. The sound cut through the hum of the fan like a gavel. Elaine exhaled. 40 households. 40 is a choir, Lien said. They may not like the tune. Uncle tapped the stack. Certified mail tomorrow. Copy the city. Names within lines, addresses clear. Easy for the clerk to approve. He jotted a cover note in his block print, each word anchoring the page. Petition enclosed. Request pursuant to bylaws. Ben wiped sauce from his fingers. "You want me? Delivering door to door." "Smile is plenty," I said. "It works better." The listserv pinged again. "Will landscapers get paid?" "What's an audit freeze?" I printed the clerk's ruling and taped it beside the petition limited to ordinary expenses pending audit. Bureaucratic words, but steadying when posted eye level. Elaine poured refills, the smell of coffee mixing with brisket smoke. The fan kept clicking. The ledger lay open, waiting for me to mark today's count. Neighbors lingered, reluctant to leave the hum of shared purpose. Then my phone vibrated against the workbench. Brittany's name on the sender line. Subject mandatory special meeting scheduled. Attendance required. The glow lit Elaine's face. Her smile thinned, but didn't break. Ben whistled low. Lien arched a brow. Uncle folded the cover note neatly, unbothered. I set the phone beside the stapled petition. Metal gleamed under the garage light, quiet as resolve. The ledger waited for one more line. The HOA meeting room was already full when we walked in the afternoon sun, turning the blinds into white ladders across the wall. Folding chairs scraped and settled. The smell of barbecue drifted in from the parking lot where foil trays waited on card tables. Brittany sat at the head of the long laminate table, like a captain at low tide, fingers locked around the chair arms. Tom took the seat to her right and studied a legal pad that didn't seem to have anything written on it. I set the leather ledger at the edge of the table where the light could find it. Elaine's hand brushed my sleeve and fell away. Her smile was small and proud, not for show. Uncle Raymond stood behind me, one palm on the back of my chair like a steadying post. Brittany clicked the microphone on. The old speaker coughed and hissed. "We will begin," she said, voice tight. "Tonight's special meeting concerns procedural clarifications following the recent pause in our accounts. There has been confusion. What occurred was simply policy." A murmur moved across the room. Uncle leaned down. "Don't chase it," he said softly. "Let the papers do the talking." The management company representative cleared his throat and began to read the agenda. Before he could finish, the city representative, same clerk from the hearing, hair pinned up, expression neutral, raised a hand. "First item," she said into her own mic, is acknowledgement of the city's order pending audit. That order remains in effect. Ordinary expenses only. Brittany shifted the chair, groaning under her grip. "We're capable of managing our affairs," she said. The freeze was an overreaction. "Understood," the clerk said as if she were noting the weather. Second item, a homeowner petition verified. We will read it into the record. Uncle slid the stapled stack forward. The metal gleamed where the garage light had polished it the day we clicked it shut. The clerk read the header in a clear voice. Petition to call a vote of no confidence in the HOA board and to adopt transparency amendments including limits on attorney fees without recorded votes and accessible records upon request. She paused as the hum rose, then continued. Signatures verified 40 households. Names can be forged, Brittany said, but her eyes didn't lift to meet anyone else's. Tom's pen hovered, then lowered, then hovered again. The clerk set the petition down. We will proceed to a vote. She explained the process like she had said it 100 times. Ballots issued, one per household, collected in a plastic tub that had once held pool noodles. Volunteers handed out paper and small golf pencils that sharpened to pinpoints. People leaned over their knees to write. Elaine took the pencil from my hand and wrote our name and box number with the same neat firmness she used on library cards. Lien, 2 rows up, lifted her ballot like a conductor cues a final chord and walked it to the tub. Ben palmed his paper, grinned at me, and dropped it with a barely contained flourish. When the last ballot slid in, Uncle glanced at the ledger, then at me. "Breathe," he said again, and I did. The count was not dramatic. The clerk read numbers into the mic while 2 volunteers tallied. No one spoke above a whisper. Somewhere outside, a kid laughed and a soda can hissed open. "Motion carries," she said at last. "No confidence in the current board effective immediately. New elections to be scheduled per bylaws." A second paper rustled in her hands. "Transparency amendments passed by majority limits on attorney fees without recorded votes. Mandatory posting of minutes with signatures. Response deadlines for records requests. Quarterly open financials." The room didn't cheer yet. It exhaled. Shoulders dropped. Someone in the rear row said, "Finally," and no one shushed him. Brittany gripped the chair one moment longer, then stood. Her smile had gone flat. It was just policy, she said to no one in particular. The city rep lifted a folder. "Restitution," she read, "for improperly assessed attorney fees and costs related to the lien to be paid to Mr. Vaughn within 30 days. The freeze order is lifted to allow that payment and ordinary operations under the amendments." Tom stared at his legal pad. The pen in his hand drew a straight line that trailed off the page. He looked up and tried to nod at me. It came out more like a twitch. I opened the ledger. The coffee ring on the margin had faded to the color of tea, a circle of what we survived. I wrote slowly, letting the strokes find their weight, Lien closed. The line didn't need to be long, it just needed to be true. The applause came after the scratch of my pen as if the sound had given permission. It started with 2 claps, then a row, then the room. Not a roar. This was a neighborhood, not a stadium, but hands meeting hands, shoulders touched in small congratulations. Ben thumped my back like he was burping a baby. Lien wiped at a corner of her eye and then laughed at herself. Uncle rested his hand on the ledger and closed it with a care that felt ceremonial. "Stewardship," he said, almost under his breath. "That's what they call it. Tonight, it sounded like what it is." Brittany lifted her bag and walked out the side door. The sun caught the edge of her folder and made it glow. Then the door eased shut behind her with a soft, pneumatic sigh. Tom stayed seated a second longer, then stood and followed his tie slightly off-center for the first time since I'd met him. Chairs scraped again as people stood in little clusters. The room thinned, the sound relocated itself to the hallway and then to the lot. The potluck had grown legs foil, pulled back smoke, and sugar and vinegar hanging in the air. Someone plugged a slow cooker into an extension cord and made room for a tray of brownies on the hood of a car. The clerk stopped on her way out. "Mr. Vaughn," she said, "your records request deadlines are in the amendment text. If you don't receive responses, call my office." "Thank you," I said. The words felt practical and huge at the same time. Elaine looped her arm through mine. Outside, kids sprinted by with paper plates like kites. Ben handed out small sandwiches and declared the pickles heroic. Lien organized a line that was not quite a line, but worked anyway. I stepped to the edge of the lot and set the ledger on a flat spot of the low stone wall. The sun caught the leather and brightened the worn places until they looked like part of the design. I opened to the last page and tilted it so the light could run across the words. In that glow, the coffee ring looked less like damage and more like history, a mark that said the book had been used for what books are meant to do. Elaine leaned in. "Looks new," she said. "It isn't," I said. "Exactly," Uncle added, joining us. He tapped the cover with 2 fingers, then nodded toward the tables. "Go eat. Numbers did their job. Let the smoke finish it." A child bumped my knee and kept running a triangle of cornbread in one hand, a folded napkin in the other. I slid the ledger under my arm and took a step into the sun. The pages flashed once plain paper catching ordinary light, and I let myself pause just long enough to see it. The blinds clicked shut on the old meeting room, and outside the lot smelled of hickory smoke and sweet sauce from the potluck tables. I laid the cleaned ledger open where neighbors could see the last line. Lien closed the stain now, more like a badge than a scar. Justice isn't loud. It's steady, and sometimes it comes in the form of ballots, folded brisket foil, and a handshake across a fence. We didn't win by rage, but by patience receipts and showing up shoulder to shoulder. If your streets weathered its own storm of fines or silence, I'd love to hear how your neighbors found their way back.